Sometimes in life after loss, feeling joy can lead to feeling guilt. But joy is and always will be a human right. Welcome back to the 50/50 Project, where every week I talk through an item on a list made up of one thing I've learned for each year I've lived. We are getting pretty close to the end of this project and to the end of this list, and I'm wrapping up with a series of 5 items that fall into the category of loss. And this week we're at thing number 47. Joy is still your birthright. Sometimes when we talk about birthrights, we're talking about birth order or the rights of succession or inheritance or the things that were afforded according to birth order, like an heir title going to the firstborn son. But today, when I say birthright, I mean something that is an inherent, natural, or moral right that comes just by virtue of existing as a human being, and something that in any civilized society we don't impede for other people. In my book, joy is one of those things that we're entitled to just for being human. I mean, assuming that we're not like absolute monsters of some kind. I'm not thinking about monsters today. I'm just saying that for the rest of us, for most of us, joy is something that we're all entitled to cultivate and cherish and keep if we could find it. But it can be hard to remember that after a major loss. I think that struggle to accept moments of joy in the face of loss is probably a feeling that's most intense in the days and weeks and months just after something terrible has happened to someone we love. But I know from personal experience that it can also hang around for a really long time and influence not just a season of your life, but the whole trajectory of it, really. A friend of mine who works in healthcare in the hospice space refers to that feeling as happiness guilt. And she sees a lot of it, both in those who've just experienced a loss and in those who are gearing up for one. When you're sitting with a dying loved one and a moment of joy breaks through all that heaviness, it's a gift. But it can also make you feel tremendously guilty the second it passes. And if you've just said goodbye to someone, not only is it really hard to feel happy, but the second you do, you can get clobbered with the same kind of guilt. And that certainly happened to me in the immediate aftermath of my mother's death. For at least a year, maybe longer, it felt absolutely vile to let more than, 1 minute go by without simply crumbling under the weight of that grief as an 11-year-old child who had just lost the absolute center of my life. My mom died in late November, and I can distinctly remember that although Christmas was total agony that year, there was a moment when I, quote unquote, forgot long enough to feel sort of excited on New Year's Eve when they were counting down to the changing of the year on an area radio station. And I remember thinking to myself, well, Happy New Year. And then it all hit me again. And it was like, what the hell do you mean, Happy New Year? Even in your own head. None of us are ever going to be truly happy again. So, wham, crushing sadness. And then, right on the heels of that, extreme guilt. Because what kind of kid forgets, even for a second, that her mom is dead and is never, ever coming back? And of course, over time, the sharpness of that faded year by year. But there was, until I was, well into my 30s, a real remnant of that in me. It no longer was that conscious process of remembering and feeling a specific defined guilt, but there was always an instinctive recoil from any true joy. My whole life, I've been unable to fully embrace happiness and joy. I can feel it in fleeting moments and in small bursts, but I can't sit with it. And even to this day, I don't do a great job of sitting with it. There's just a distrust of it and an assumption that whatever has come to lift me up will only go on to leave again and break my heart. And I think under that, there's also this feeling that this will be the case because it is for me just destined to be so, that I'm just somehow not meant for joy. Brene Brown talks about something kind of akin to this feeling, which she calls foreboding joy. She's talked about that strange phenomenon that seems to strike us with fear in moments of our greatest happiness. She uses the example of a parent watching their beloved child sleeping in their crib, whose heart is just flooded first with unexpressible love and joy, but then, almost immediately afterward, is seized by the fear that the world is a dangerous place and that something terrible could so easily happen to this perfect, beautiful child. If you want to read more about her thoughts on foreboding joy and how it connects to her work in vulnerability, I think the book called Daring Greatly is a really good place to start. Anyway, she sees this as a pretty universal phenomenon, and I think it probably is. But I do also think that, for me at least, there's a thick layer of the experience that is directly connected to early, deep bereavement. For this loss that came before I had developed the skills or the understandings to process happiness guilt well, and that became just sort of baked deeply into who I am. Almost 25 years later, when I lost my dad, that experience reawakened the sharper, more focused feeling of happiness guilt for a very long while. The same experience of having a moment of untortured existence, then remembering his loss, then being crushed by it anew, and then, of course, feeling real guilt about having had even a moment's peace. And then an interesting thing started happening many months out. When I had one of these moments of joy followed by guilt, I was much better able to explore those feelings at 35 than I had been, of course, at 11. And something pretty profound shifted. And I was able to release my guilt more easily this time because it was so obvious to me as an adult, with an adult's understanding of who my dad was and how he saw the world, that he would simply not want for me to carry grief over his death around me like an albatross. He would want me to feel joy. He would want me to reconnect fully with the best of the experience of being alive, even though he no longer is. And so every time I lose myself in the breathtaking beauty of a sunset or in the hilarity of a good joke, I know I'm not dishonoring him in death, but rather celebrating his way of living life and fulfilling what I know were his hopes for me. And all of that helped me to also put down some of the heaviness that I've carried for decades with me since my mother died so many years ago. It's not gone. All the years that have passed since her death, and this revelation too, they haven't fixed me. They haven't massaged me back into the shape I was in before it happened. They haven't restored me to factory settings of who I was meant to be. And I still struggle mightily with those feelings of foreboding joy. But for me, for the most part, the deepest and worst part of happiness guilt has mostly faded. Now, I'm not saying the old adage, they wouldn't want you to be sad, is a magic bullet of any kind. In many circumstances, it's just an empty bullshit platitude. After enough time had passed, though, and given my relationship with my particular father, it did help me to set down some of the worst of my version of happiness guilt. But I'm not saying it's the way forward for everybody. I do think, though, that those of us who have experienced early bereavement, and maybe everybody, since we're all reeling from some loss at some time, should maybe think consciously about what we're feeling when we do catch ourselves pushing joy away. I think it might be helpful for a lot of us. Is there guilt in the mix somewhere? And if there is, how can we really confront that guilt and parse it and sit with it and ultimately learn to put it aside? It's a really hard process, and I do not have all the answers. But even without all the answers, I wanted to incorporate what I have learned into this list about this because I think timing's really important here. I am just a fundamentally different person today as someone who began working through this only in my 30s than I would be if I had been able to unravel my feelings in my teens or my 20s. I think I would be better at making and finding and holding joy if it had happened earlier. And I think my life, past, present, and even future, would have been happier in lots of ways if this wasn't a belief ingrained unchallenged for 25 very formative years of my life. I can't change that now. And I'm grateful that the process of grieving my father unlocked that process at all, no matter how late in the game. I see that as his last gift to me, in a way. But if anyone's walking the path of bereavement and struggling with this at any time of life, I hope that you'll find a mechanism for working through these feelings earlier rather than later, even if it means taking the proactive step to get some help. I really wish I'd known how to do that as a younger person. But still, it's a process that now, late in life, I've learned that I have to work through and stick with because joy is my birthright. No matter how sad life has been at times or how heavy and significant my losses have felt, it's still my birthright. And I think it's yours too. Okay, so that's probably enough out of me for now. I hope you'll find your joy and that you'll let yourself keep it close. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I'll be back soon with thing number 48.